Hi everyone, my name is Katie Brooke and this is a video tutorial of how to use some basic formula using Google Sheets. So if you're part of the session, you will have had a spreadsheet shared with you as a template. If you haven't, then you can use the example on screen to create your own, or maybe get in touch with one of your regional leads and they can possibly send you a copy of the template as well. The first tab in the spreadsheet that I've shared with you, the Google Sheet, is the explanation of the formulas. So you've got four different explanations on screen. The sum, which is adding a range of cells together. That could be a whole column or row of data, but it doesn't need to be. It could just be a selected range within that sheet. The average, which is the second one on screen. The average in this example, because sometimes it's slightly different with different formulas, but the average in this is basically the sum of the cells divided by how many cells are in that data set. The third one is count A, which counts the number of cells holding data. So, for example, if you wanted to count the number of children in the class, obviously their names will be the range, and then you can count those rather than trying to work out how many rows of data there are. It will do that for you. And the third one is count if, which is a slightly more complex formula function within Google Sheets, but once you see it in action, it should be fairly straightforward as to how you might use that. And that basically counts the number of cells, similar to count A, but based on a specific criteria. So you have to say, based on the information that's in that spreadsheet, I only want to count them if, for example, they are female, or if, for example, they are over 80%. The second sheet in this Google Sheet is the complete data set. So this is what the final product will look like. So the idea is this Google Sheet will give you an overview of Class A's autumn assessments. This can obviously be duplicated for each term, but for this example, I've gone with autumn. So you've got the students' names down the left-hand side here, which you will edit to be your students. Then you've got a number of different columns. So I've got a spelling test result. I've got a reading assessment. I've got maths, both arithmetic and reasoning, and the total of those assessments. I've then given an overall score for that particular student. At the bottom here is the average score for each of those assessments, so the average that each child got. And then underneath that, if I just scroll down a little bit, you've got how many children within that class have reached age-related expectations or above. So for this particular data set, you can see that out of the 15 students, 11 of them in spelling, looking at that column there, managed to achieve ARE or above. And then going across, you've got 11 in reading, 12 in arithmetic, 9 in reasoning, and then if you were to combine the arithmetic and the reasoning, that will bring you out at 11 students. So you've also got that for the overall score as well. Over here on the right-hand side, you've got some information that you're going to need to be able to figure out those formulas. And as I say, with this tutorial, I'll explain how to do that in more detail as we go through. But you will need to know the maximum score for each of the assessments. So what is the top score that you can get? And you'll also need to know what your school considers, or the assessment is considered as ARE. So what score within that assessment would they need to get ARE? So that could be a conversation you have with SLT, or it could be within the documentation you get from the exam board. So I've gone with an example as if a child manages to get 40 out of the maximum 60, they are considered ARE, age-related, and then so on. But this data will be edited based on what your school have chosen. And that brings us to the fourth tab in this Google Sheet. So this is where you're going to have a practice at using each of those functions we discussed right at the beginning of the tutorial to work out how to get this spreadsheet to automatically calculate those averages, those totals, and actually get it working for you. So the first job I'm going to do is use my sum formula. I want to know what the maximum score is for all of the assessments that I've got in this sheet. So adding up all of these numbers here together. Now we could do that in our heads and enter the information, but for the purpose of this demonstration, we're going to use the sum formula. So all formulas start with an equals, and then we use the function that we're going to be practicing. So in this example, it's sum, and it's given me a nice little helpful hint there. Following the function, the word, we're going to do an open bracket. The next job we need to do is to select the range of cells that we want to add together. Because remember, we're using the sum formula, so we're adding them together. So I can either use my mouse or using the cell reference, but the mouse is the easiest way to do it. So I'm going to select the first set of data in my range and drag down with my mouse without letting go of my cursor. And then when I get to the end of my data set, then I can let go. You'll see that it's entered the first cell reference, so R6, which is the column and row for the first part of my data. Then it's used a colon. And then the final set of data, which is down to R9 in this case. Now that formula isn't finished because I haven't used my closing bracket, and it will probably throw up an error if I don't pop that in there. So we'll pop the closing bracket on and then hit enter on your keyboard. And then that will automatically work out the sum of the range of cells that I've got there. I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to repeat the same function here. Again, I've put a little comment in there to remind you what functions you need to be using. So starting with the equals, as all functions do. Sum, doesn't matter whether it's lowercase or uppercase. Open bracket, select the range of cells. So again, clicking in the first cell that I want, dragging my mouse down. And once I've got to the final cell in my data range, letting go of my mouse. And finally, not forgetting the closing bracket on my function, hitting enter. So that's the sum function, adding those range of cells together, nice and quick and easy, remembering to use the equals at the beginning and closing off any brackets at the end. The next function that we're going to be looking at is the average. So the first thing we need to do is enter some data into each of the assessments to be able to find an average. So I'm just going to copy and paste the data that I've got from the other tab for the purpose of this demonstration to speed things up a little bit. And if when you're practicing you want to do the same, you're welcome to as well. I'm simply copying and pasting, so Control-C, Control-V with that data. I then need to work out the percentage. So again, I've had a little comment in there for you to remind yourself how to work out the percentage. So we're going to do equals. Again, we're doing a formula, so we start with an equals. Select the cell. So this is the first student in this particular case. And I want to say 56 divided by my max score, so the total score that I can get. So 56, so this one here, C4, divided by, now we don't have a divide key on our keyboard, we use the slash in Google Sheets. And over to R6 in this particular case, which is my max score for my spellings, and hit enter. So now it's giving me a helpful hint, an autofill. So do you want to follow this formula down? Now, if I click yes, you'll notice that the data is incorrect and it's throwing up loads of errors. That's because not only will it move the first cell reference down, so C4 changes into C5, it also moves the cell reference for the max score as well. So it goes from R6 to R7. And that's fine until it starts moving down here, but it's not actually the data that we want. So in order to make that work correctly, so we've edited that to have a $ before the R and a $ before the 6. That means it will stick to that max score for spelling in this example when I autofill. So to correct this now, I'm going to click once on the cell, so I'm not in editing mode, and it gives me the box on the far right-hand side corner at the bottom. You can see my mouse change when I hover over it. So it goes from an arrow to a hand, and then right in the corner it gives me a circle. And when it's at that circle, I can click and drag down as far as I need to go to autofill that function. And you'll see now that that data, if you matched it up with a template, is correct. So looking at the cell, just to check, it's gone down to C5, which is right, but it's stuck with R6, that max spelling score. So we're going to repeat that for reading, arithmetic, and reasoning. So copying and pasting the data and entering the percentage data for those. If you want to pause the video now and have a go at Okay, the final part we need to do before we can actually look at that average function which we're practicing today is the total for the maths and the reasoning and the arithmetic together. So again, I've added a comment on there to remind you what to do. Starting the formula with an equals, we're going to add, selecting the cell we want to add together, using the plus key on our keyboard, and selecting the second cell and hit enter. In this case, we can autofill because each time we want the row to jump down with the arithmetic and the reasoning column, and that will autofill those totals in. And again, we are adding in that percentage, the same way we did previously for the spelling, reading, and arithmetic. Now you've completed all of the data set, you can now start using these functions. So average, we want over here at the bottom. So we're going to do our spelling average first. So reminding ourselves that functions start with an equals. We're doing the average function. So I'm going to type the word average, reminder, it doesn't need to be in capital letters, it can be if you like. Open your bracket, select the data range that I want to make the average for. Again, clicking on the first cell, not letting go of my mouse, dragging right the way to the bottom cell. When I get to that one, let go of my mouse. And finally, adding my closing bracket and hitting enter. That gives me the average score. So out of these 15 children, the average score was 41. I'm going to repeat that for reading, equals average, open bracket, select the range of cells, close the bracket, hit enter. You're then going to do the percentage in the same way. So equals this value divided by this value, reminding to put the dollar signs either side of the one we don't want to move. And that gives you the average score and the average percentage for each of the assessments. So if you want to go in and populate each of those now, press pause on the video. So with just a few simple functions, we're starting to get meaningful data from our data set now. We've got our average in there. So the next job we're going to move on to is using the count A. That tells us the number of students in the class, which we could use. So equals, again, we're going to name our function, count A, open bracket. We are choosing the student name. So remember, just select the rows that you want to count or the columns that you want to count, because it will simply count the cells that have data in them. So if you go above and below, then that data won't be correct. So I've started at student 1 and right down to student 15, close my bracket, and it tells me that out of all those rows, 15 of them have data in there. So that's a quick way of using count A. The fourth function we're going to look at is count if. So we've looked at the sum, we've looked at average, we've looked at count A, and the fourth one being count if. So starting with our equals, naming our function that we want to use, so count if, no spaces, doesn't matter about capitalization, and open bracket. So as with all of our other functions, we are going to start by selecting the range of cells that we want to be using for this data. So in my case, I'm looking at the spellings data as that's the column that I'm in, so C4 down to C18. And this time, rather than closing the bracket, because that's not the end of this particular function, we need to insert the comma. Following that comma, we need to think about what criteria we want to count against. So in this example, we want to count if those students have a score above 40, because remember, that's what we entered over here. So we want to say if this range has a score of 40 or above, we can include it in the count. So we use inverted commas, so using your speech marks on your keyboard. In my case, they're shift and number 2, but depending on your layout of your keyboard, it might be slightly different. You want to say greater than or equals to 40, entering that numerical data. And closing our speech marks off, closing off our inverted commas, closing our brackets, and hit enter. And that says that 11 students for spelling managed to gain a score of 40 or above. And if you just look quickly down and scan down the list, obviously we've only got 15 students, so it's quite easy to see which ones those are. You can see that that data is correct. And we're going to repeat that for our reading. Equals, count if, open bracket, select the data range, E4 down to E18, comma. Don't forget those inverted commas for the next part for our criteria, otherwise it will throw up an error. Greater than or equals to, in this case I'm looking now at 21. Inverted comma, close brackets, enter. If you'd like to go through and repeat that for arithmetic and reasoning and for the total, you're welcome to do that now. Press pause on the video. We're almost done with our overview now. We're just going to add in those overall scores. So we're going to use equals, and we're going to add together each of the raw scores for each assessment. So I want to add C4. I can do this by selecting the cell if I like. E4, again, capitalization, doesn't matter. G4 and I4. Hit enter. And because I can use autofill for this particular function, because each time I do want the rows to count down, I can autofill that down here. If I click that, just click the right button, autofill it right down to the bottom. And that gives me my overall score for each child. Again, working out the percentage equals this value divided by this value. Can't autofill that without adding in the dollar signs, because I do not want that second part of the formula to count down. And autofill that cell. At the bottom here, we can do exactly the same as we've done all along with our functions. So equals average, open bracket, select all the overall scores, hit enter, and here again we can do equals this cell divided by this cell. The final thing I wanted to show you today was a couple of design features I've used on this particular spreadsheet. Make it look less like a spreadsheet with all the grid lines and everything on it. So using the tool at the top, we've gone to the view, and there is a tick option next to grid lines. If I tick on that now, you'll see the difference. So the actual spreadsheet comes back with all of the grid lines on there, like you might notice when you first open Google Sheets. So I've just simply gone to the view and unticked that. But obviously some of them do have grid lines on there. So like these ones here, I've forced those on there. I've put them on as a design feature. So I've highlighted the area. I've gone to the ribbon here and gone to borders. For this heavyweight line, I've just changed the line thickness here and put the outside borders on. And that puts the thicker line around the edge. I'll show you down here so you can see it a little bit easier. If I want the thinner line, again, I'm going to go back to my borders, change the border width back. I think I've actually used a grey as well on these. So change that to grey and do the internal and external borders. And you can see the difference here where they're on and off. So just a little design feature that I've used that you might want to include when you're creating your spreadsheets. And I've also used a fill colour as well. So I've used a gradient blue as the fill colour to match over here. And the other thing that I've done is if I change the wording here of the test, so call this test 1, it also changes the name over here. So it's a very quick and easy way to do it. It's changed all 3. So it filters off this one here. If I change that back to spelling, again, it's changed them all. So all I've done to do that is clicking in this cell here and made it equal to whatever that cell is over there. Exactly the same here. Equals, and then click on the cell, hit enter, and then whatever I type in my starting cell with, it'll change all the ones that are linked to it. So in this case, this one and this one. So I could have done it the other way around if I wanted to. I could have linked it to this one, but because it's a merged cell, it's slightly trickier. So I've gone for here, made that one my original cell, and this one and this one are both equal to it. Up here at the top, we've got a long merged cell, which is this button here. And then to insert the comments, if you haven't already worked out how to do that, you can use Control, Alt, and M. And then the final thing I would add if I was to use this spreadsheet myself, I would do some conditional formatting on the percentages. So maybe if a percentage was over the ARE, so 40 score at 67%, I might conditionally format that to go a different colour. And there is a video tutorial of how to do that on our Elliott Foundation YouTube site if you want to go have a look for that. Hope you found today's session useful and you learned a new skill. Thank you for your time.